And then we're gonna dive in. So thank you all for joining us today. I'm Kate Duvall. I'm the president of Piedmont CASA, the very new president of this organization. I joined this summer in June, and I am just delighted to hit the ground running by kicking off our webinar series focused on the risk factors of children falling into foster care with Ridge Schuyler. A couple of housekeeping things before I turn it over to Ridge. I have you all muted so that we can really focus on Ridge. If you have a question or a concern, feel free to chat, use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen and send me a message privately, or you can chat with the whole group if you want. If you have questions as Ridge is going along, you can put those into a private chat or to a public chat, and I will be managing the questions. So if I see one that I may ask Ridge to pause and address a question, or some of them we may hold on till the end. We hope to open the kind of forum up a little bit at the end for folks if you have questions that you'd like to pipe up and ask. And we can do that after Ridge is done with his presentation. I think that's it. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to send me a chat. We're really just delighted to have you all here, and so happy to be welcoming Ridge Schuyler. Ridge, I'm gonna give your intro, but I may gloss over some of it because I know folks really are here to hear you talk and not me talk. So Ridge serves as the Dean of Piedmont Virginia Community College's 2 Community Self Sufficiency programs, which utilize multiple resources in our community to identify and support people being left behind in our economy, and provides the training and supports they need to find quality employment in our community. Ridge graduated from the University of Michigan and the University of Virginia School of Law. Go Who's. I'm also a grad of UVA Law. Ridge spent 10 years on Capitol Hill serving as Chief of Staff to U.S. Congressman Rick Boucher and Chief Policy Advisor to U.S. Senator Charles Robb of Virginia. In 2011, Ridge published the Orange Dot Report, which analyzed the economic struggles facing a considerable portion of Charlottesville's families and suggested solutions. Ridge founded and directs Network to Work, a partnership between the Charlottesville Regional Chamber of Commerce and PVCC to implement those solutions. Turning it over to you now, Ridge.
Great. You make me sound more grand than I actually am, but thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully nobody gets PowerPoint poisoning. Just want to make sure that everybody can see what I've got up there. Great. So what we're going to talk about today is economic renewal and rebuilding a healthy economy close to home. And the risk factor, just to bring this home to y'all's interest, is one of the risk factors for getting into foster care are when parents are struggling in our economy and can't keep all the balls in the air, and something happens that makes it so that they lose custody of their children. And it is the crush of that low-wage economy that has just enormous consequences, even for kids who stay in the home. And so that is the particular focus of our work, is the folks who are struggling in our economy in the Charlottesville region. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. When we talk about the struggles of people in our economy, it's helpful to look at the numbers. This is the number of families in our region that make less than $35,000 a year. And if you've read the Orange Dot Report, you will know that $35,000 a year is kind of the basic minimum that a mom with 2 kids needs to earn in order to make ends meet. That's if she's getting the earned income tax credit on top of her wages, and that that is the breaking point, and that number is driven largely by the cost of housing. So as our housing prices go up, the amount of income that a parent needs to earn in order to support their family also goes up. And so, you know, in addition to trying to boost incomes, which I'll talk about today, part of our other challenge is how do we also make sure that there's housing that is affordable to people at the same time. I think of it as working on both sides of the ledger. How do we boost incomes and how do we reduce expenses for those families that are being left behind? But as you can see, the largest number of seekers or families making less than $35,000 a year are in Albemarle County. And then you can see Louisa and Charlottesville are neck and neck there next, and then on with the other counties that surround Charlottesville. When you look at the percentages, you'll see that it is 17% of the families of our region that make less than $35,000 a year. So that's nearly 1 out of every 5 families makes less than what we have determined is necessary for them to support their families without assistance. And you can see there, Buckingham, while it's a small county, has a very large number of families that are being left behind, almost a third. But then Nelson and Charlottesville are right there, and Louisa, you know, just a huge percentage of families that are struggling in our economy, and all the risks that then attend to them, their children, and so we'll talk about that. One of the things that I think is really important to keep in mind is that the burden of that low incomeness is not equally shared in our community. So while it is 17% of all families that make less than $35,000 a year, it's 14% of white families and 35% of Black families. So a third of the Black families in our region do not earn $35,000 or more. And when you look at the city of Charlottesville in particular, it's even worse. Fully half of the Black families of Charlottesville make less than $35,000 a year, compared to 13% of white families. And if we had an equitable system and an equitable economy, then you would expect to see 22% of white families, 22% of Black families, but that is not what we see. And that has enormous consequences. A recent housing needs assessment that was done as part of the Affordable Housing Plan put it in slightly different terms, looking at median income. And as you can see on this slide, the median income for a white family in Charlottesville, in the Charlottesville region, is $68,000, and for a Black person, it is $29,000. So no matter how you look at it, there is a disproportionate effect on our Black residents in terms of income in our region. It matters for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that the Federal Reserve recently released a report that showed that the racial wealth gap, which many of you may have heard about, the difference between what an average white family and what an average Black family in America has, is driven largely by unequal labor income. It has long been a held belief that it had to do with home ownership, and while that is definitely a factor, what the Cleveland Fed determined in their research is that it's based on unequal labor income, that the labor of our Black neighbors is not valued as much as the labor of our white neighbors. And that then leads to decreases in amount of home ownership, et cetera, and all the other things that flow from that. But in a capital economy, what you earn dictates the wealth that you can create. And just to demonstrate that, that disparity, you know, the average net worth of a white family in Charlottesville was $162,000. Black families had 10 cents on the dollar to that, about $16,000 in net worth. And that's nationwide. And it can be explained by that unequal labor income, which we see here close to home in Charlottesville. So with that as a backdrop, I'm going to talk about how do we address that problem? How do we address the fact that there are so many families, 1 out of every 5 just generally in our region, or 1 out of every 2 Black families in Charlottesville? How are we going to address this unequal labor income that leads to families being low income, and the stress that comes with that, and what we know is the trauma that comes with that, the trauma of trying to make ends meet when you don't earn enough to support yourself and your family, and you worry every month about who's going to pay the mortgage, or who's going to pay the rent, or how am I going to afford groceries, or how am I going to afford to fix my car. That stress is a trauma that is visited upon low-income people in America, because the coin of the realm in our country is coin. And if you don't have coin, you are under an enormous amount of stress all the time. And that stress includes how you treat your children or your ability to care for your children. And so that trauma, it's not, the trauma that you would expect from a motorcycle accident, but is no less real. And I don't think I included in this slide deck, so I'll just say it here at the front end, that based on the Health Inequality Project that was done by Roz Chetty and a group out of Stanford, it was determined that in Charlottesville, a poor person lives a life that is 12 years shorter than a wealthy person. So it shortens your life as well as makes the life that you live very difficult. So the question is, how do you solve poverty? And I'm going to define poverty as people who make less than that $35,000 a year and have difficulty supporting their families as a result. Well, as I mentioned, and as Kate mentioned, I am a lawyer, and so I did a lot of research to figure out how do you solve poverty. And I actually figured out the answer after a lot of research. And you're about to hear it right now. How do you solve poverty? You give money to poor people. Now, how do you do that? Well, there is only one group with the capability and interest in giving people money, even more than they need, month after month, year after year. And that's employers. And if you've read any newspaper in the last number of months, you know that there are employers in our community and across the country that are absolutely desperate to hand people money. They are giving money away if they can find the people to give the money to. And when asked, when I talk about employers as the answer to poverty, people are like, well, this, that, and the other thing. And I respond by saying I focus on employers, much like when Willie Sutton, the famous bank robber, was asked, why do you rob banks? And Willie Sutton said, because that's where the money is. We look at employers because that's where the money is, and they want to give the money away. They don't have to go raise it from anybody other than their consumers. They've got the money, they want to spend it. So I'm going to show you a very short video of the network to work framework that we use to try to figure out how do we connect that employer who wants to hand away that money with the people who've been kicked to the curb by our economy that are having difficulty supporting their families. So if you'll bear with me, this is a less than 90-second animation that explains this better than I could.
Network to Work matches quality job seekers to available jobs that pay a decent wage and lead to family-sustaining careers. We do this by listening to local employers to understand their needs. We share that real-time job information with job seekers and with a network of community connectors, individuals who are well-known and respected in their communities, who identify job seekers who are fit for the job. When job seekers select a job they want to pursue, we talk to them and get a full understanding of what they may need in order to get the job they've chosen, like skills training, affordable childcare, reliable transportation, healthcare, and more. We connect job seekers directly with partner community organizations to address those needs. And we use award-winning technology to create individualized career paths for each job seeker based on what they've told us. And we can help them navigate that pathway every step of the way. We get to know the job seeker. We know the employers. We know resource providers. And we can help make the connections. At Network to Work, we connect real people to real jobs so they can realize their potential.
So that is our framework. It is not, as you might imagine, it is not rocket science, but it takes an enormous amount of intentional effort. And so I'm going to walk you through how this works in our community and what we're doing to address this challenge of families that are not able to support themselves and their children. So our framework is really a three-step framework, as alluded to in the animation. The first is we talk to employers and we find out what are the jobs that they have that pay a decent wage that can lead to a family-sustaining career. And when we talk to employers, we aren't talking to just any employer, and we are not finger waggers saying, just go get a job. Because there are jobs, the fact of the matter is a lot of our job seekers are actually working for a living. They're just not highly valued. They're working, part-time at Bed Bath & Beyond or at a fast food restaurant. So we talk to employers that pay a decent wage, that offer jobs to people who don't, and they don't require a college degree, because a lot of our job seekers don't have time to go get that college degree. They've got families to support. They're trying to get into a job that pays them a decent wage as quickly as they can. So part of the award-winning technology that we built is we talk to employers and we collect job information from them and put it on our platform. And the sectors that we focus in on are ones that lead to family-sustaining careers like healthcare, construction, manufacturing, driving and warehouse jobs. We have been doing this work since 2014-15, and so we now have enough experience where employers trust us when we send job seekers to them. And so we make this we collect this job seeker information from those employers so that we can connect job seekers to those jobs that are real in our community. So gone are the days where we say, as a community college, invite people into a training program and then pray that they can find an employer after they're done. The train and pray days are over. We start with the job. Who's got the jobs? Who's got the jobs that pay the decent wage? And then let's go and leverage those up for the people in our community who've been left behind. The second step, and really, I think the difference maker and the thing that sets us apart, is that we recruit job seekers. We engage in a ground game. So we think of this as the secret sauce of Network to Work. In the past, the way that we have, as a nation, as a community, the way that we have tried to attract job seekers is to expect them to show up when jobs are available, or when a training is available to maybe get them into that job. And so, historically and traditionally, what we have done, and I'll just pull a page from the community college's playbook about how they used to try to find job seekers. They would mail a catalog, a training catalog, to every poor, in neighborhoods where poor people lived. So they would mail a PVCC catalog into neighborhoods, and with the expectation that let's just pull an example, that single mom has come home from her day of retail work where she made, back when minimum wage was $7.25, comes back from her full-time job where she made $14,400 a year, expected her to get her kids working on their homework at the dinner table, expect her to sit down on her couch, put her feet up on the coffee table while the kids are diligently and quietly working at the table, open up the course catalog to page 17, notice that there was a phlebotomy technician training, and expect her to say, you know what? I think I'll become a phlebotomist. I think that's what's next for me. And look, it's only a $2,000 training. I'm going to go sign up for that and become a phlebotomist, whatever that is. Well, you and I know that is not the way people decide to change their lives. And so we were going to get the same kind of results we've always gotten if we just kept mailing catalogs into people, or putting now hiring on the side of a bus that drives by somebody who can't afford a car and is waiting for a bus to pick them up to get to their menial labor job. That way of finding people, I think of it as a marketing approach, doesn't work, because it doesn't penetrate into the lives of actual people. So our intuition that doesn't work is supported by research. HHS did an extensive study on how do people find a job? How do we connect people to jobs that pay a decent wage? This was back when, if you all have done any work in this arena, this idea of there's a hidden job market. And so we have jobs clubs where people come together and talk about the jobs they've heard about in the community. Well, what this research said is that contacting your friends and relatives was the most fruitful job search technique for both employed and unemployed job seekers. But they said, even if that's true, we don't know how to operationalize this strategy of leveraging up your friends and relatives. Well, at Network to Work, we figured it out. And you may have noticed in the animation that each of these neighborhood-based connectors, these community-based connectors, have in their hands their smartphone. We take that job information that we collect from those employers that pay family-sustaining wages, and we hand that job information directly to these connectors in neighborhoods who have that information on their smartphone, and they get that job information and they stop and think, who do I know that would be good at that? Who do I know that took care of, that person 2 doors down from me took care of their great aunt when auntie was sick. They have a huge heart. I wonder if they'd be interested in a career ladder in nursing, because I noticed that the University of Virginia, which is only 3 blocks away, is hiring for certified nurse assistants paying $30,000 a year to start. So neighborhood-based connectors receive that job information and stop and think, who do I know that would be good at that? And those community-based connectors, they're the go-to people who already exist in our community. Those are the people that other folks are already turning to for information and advice. And now those people have access to real-time job information on their smartphone, so that when somebody comes home from, let's say, jail or prison, and they want to find a job, they may turn to Harold Foley, who works at Legal Aid, who's made a name for himself in the community. They may go to Harold and say, Harold, how do I get a job? You were able to do it. How do I do it? Well, up until this point, Harold would say, well, I think I heard that maybe this plumbing company would give people a second chance. Well, instead of wondering, Harold now has access to that real-time job information on his smartphone, so that he can glance down and say, are you interested in the skilled trades? Well, this plumbing place has jobs that are available to you. Let's get going. And so that is the mechanism that we used. And this is what it looks like. So this information is on the smartphone of those neighborhood-based connectors, those people who already have enormous social capital in their communities, and they are listed by sector, so they can select on a sector or look at all the jobs. If they see a job that looks interesting, they can click on it and get more information about that job. What are its wages? Where is it? There's often a little video that explains the job, because somebody might not know what a certified nurse assistant does or a phlebotomist. So there's a little video. The information also has what are the requirements, responsibilities, and skills for that job. If there's a career path that's listed here, and the employer's greatest frustrations in hiring for that job are also listed, so that that neighborhood-based connector could say, I understand the frustrations that employers are getting, and I'm going to answer those. That we also have pre-qualification questions to make sure that the person would be a good match for that job, because the last thing we want to do is get people down a track to go to a training and get all this support, and only to find out at the end that they were not qualified for the job. You say, I want that $30,000 certified nurse assistant job. We're going to ask you, how do you feel about being around sick people or the smell of bodily fluids? And if the answer is like, no way, I'm not doing that, we would say, well, maybe you might want to think about, being a plumber instead or whatever. So they get that real-time job information. They reach out to their friends and neighbors, or their friends and neighbors reach out to them. And if it looks like a good match, they add that seeker onto the technology platform that we built. So that is the ground game that we have instituted. And so the last piece is removing all the obstacles that may stand between that job seeker and that job that they're after, removing all the obstacles that stand in the way and supporting the whole person. And what does that mean? Well, what we know is that in order to move from where they are to income independence, they need a number of things to be in place for them, just like we all do. We all need to have transportation to get to training in the job. We all need adequate health care. We all need crisis intervention if there's a crisis in our lives, like the need for a lawyer or mental health supports. We all need stable shelter. The challenge for people who are low income is that these things don't come easily as they do for middle-class Americans. A middle-class American, my kids, as they move into the workforce, they don't have to worry about food security. They don't have to worry about transportation. We bought them a car. So everybody needs all of these things, but if you're low income, these things are not coming to you organically. And so we've got to make sure that they are easily available so that they can get them too. And that really is the challenge. And the focus historically on employment as the answer to poverty often foundered on the idea that really the only thing people need is more skills. And so whenever you talked about employment as the answer, the focus is on just get them skills training. Well, skills training may be necessary in order to give you more value in the eyes of an employer, but while it's necessary, it's not sufficient. And we can train people out the yin yang to be the best certified nurse assistant that's ever been produced by a training program in the history of the world. But if that person doesn't have access to transportation that will get them to their shift on Sunday nights, which is the shift they'll be working when they first start, when the buses don't run, if they don't have a reliable way of getting to work, if they don't have somebody responsible to watch their children, if they are moving their kids from couch to couch, living with parents that don't want them there, they are not going to be successful in that job. And so we have to support the whole person, because it is the whole person who shows up at work, not just the person who is skilled. It is the person who is skilled, who's got transportation challenges and childcare challenges. We've got to address all those at the front end. Once they have all those things lined up, then we can turn back to the employer and say, hey, we've got a job seeker that would be a great match for the job that you have. And so wrapping those services around job seekers is the final step of the Network to Work framework. And again, it is part of the technology platform that we built to look holistically at the whole person and figure out what is that they need. So this is a screenshot from our technology platform. These are some of the domains that we have found that people need to have addressed in order to get from where they are to the job that pays a decent wage. And the way this works is the technology platform asks job seekers a series of questions to learn more about them. As we mentioned in the animation, we want to find out about that job seeker. Where are they? What do they need? What are the things that may stand in their way? And so we ask a series of questions in the technology platform. This is a screenshot of some of those questions. One of the questions is, were you ever in foster care as a youth? Because we know that foster kids and former foster kids face enormous challenges of what's happened in their lives and need enormous amounts of support to get where they need to go. So we want to know at the outset, are you a former foster child? We want to know other things about you, such as, are you already being supported by a program that supports former foster kids? If not, we're going to connect you to one. We ask other questions, like in the realm of education. Do you have a high school diploma or a GED? For better or for worse, many of the jobs that we have in our highly educated community require a high school diploma or GED, even when you would not think that they do. And so it's one of the questions that we ask, and we can connect them to providers that can help them get their high school diploma or GED. We are a refugee resettlement community. So we ask people, do you need assistance with the English language? These are the kinds of questions that we ask. And the questions that we ask are all tied to surfacing resource needs and also surfacing eligibility criteria for providers. So what we want to do at the end of asking our questions, and our questions are dynamic. So if at the beginning you say you don't have kids, we're not going to ask you any more questions about children. But if you say you do have children, we're going to probe a little bit and find out how old are those kids, and do you have anybody to watch them? Do you have any way to pay for somebody to watch them if we could find a provider? And so we ask those questions of all the job seekers, and it's dynamic like TurboTax, and it opens up dynamic questions based on your answers. Once we're done answering the questions, the machine then goes through the providers in our network and connects that job seeker with the best fit provider for their needs. So for that job seeker who said they did not have a high school diploma or GED, and that was required by the job, we're going to refer them to our partners over at TJ Ace to go ahead and start working on their GED. You can see down below, there are other providers that are on this particular job seekers pathway. They needed legal assistance. They needed healthcare training because they're going to be a CNA. They needed childcare assistance, and they needed some emergency financial assistance that was available during the pandemic. All of these providers are matched to that job seeker based on those job seekers' particular circumstances. So, for example, by surfacing the eligibility criteria as well as the needs, we can match job seekers to the best fit for their needs. So I'll pick out car repairs as an example. If a job seeker needs car repairs and there is a program in our community that offers that kind of financial support for former foster kids, we are going to send that former foster kid to that car repair funding assistance provider that specializes in serving foster children or former foster children, because they're going to know how to handle that and understand the trauma that former foster child might have gone through, and be patient with them as they try to collect the invoices and whatnot for getting that car repair done. So we're going to send that job seeker to the best fit provider for them in our community based on our provider network.
Ridge, can I ask you a question? This is Kate. We had a question come through the chat that asked about when you're working with job seekers' needs, do you address needs such as addiction or substance abuse needs, or mental health or physical health needs?
We do. And in a recent upgrade to our technology platform, we can now indicate which providers are sensitive providers, because you'll see here in a moment, job seekers, once they're connected to these resources, are also matched with a navigator who helps them walk the pathway, so that they're not trying to navigate the system, even though the system is laid out for them. And this screenshot that you see is the pathway that a job seeker receives. So the job seeker sees their pathway. They have all the instructions for connecting to that provider on their pathway, but we have a navigator or a coach that walks along the pathway with that job seeker. Because there are sensitive providers like mental health, like substance abuse, that pathway is only visible to the job seeker and the provider that is offering that service. So the navigator is not going to know that the job seeker they're serving has been sent to Region 10 or the Women's Initiative. Only that job seeker and that provider are going to know. And you know, it's a sad testament to our society that there's a stigma associated with mental health, but there is. And so we figured out a way to make sure that we're making those connections without divulging that information to other providers and navigators along the pathway. I mentioned that other providers also have access to that job seeker's pathway. When a job seeker is matched to a provider, like in this case, I've highlighted Thomas Jefferson Adult and Career Education, the technology platform will send a notification to that provider that a job seeker has been referred to them. And that provider then has a roster in the platform of all the people who've been referred to them from Network to Work. And that provider can then, when that job seeker shows up and is getting the services from that provider, the provider can mark that job seeker as on track for that service and close the referral loop, so that the job seeker can see tangible manifestation of their progress along their own pathway, and their navigator can also see that they're making progress. And if they've stalled, if a job seeker is supposed to go meet with TJ Ace by a date certain, and you can see here there's a due date that we've assigned to that provider in the tool. If that date comes and goes and the job seeker has not closed the referral loop with that provider, the job seeker and their navigator gets a notification that that job seeker is past due. The job seeker also gets notifications when they have something that is coming up that is due. And so the machine helps us nudge the job seekers along, because behavioral economics tells us that people need a plan. And that's what this pathway is. It's their plan. The plan needs to have dates. People need to know, when do I need to have this done by? And they need nudging to remind them that things are coming up or that things are past due, so that they can maintain progress along their pathway. And this technology platform that we build which is built off of all of that knowledge and research, is designed to do all of those things. And that's a long answer to the short question about whether or not we refer people to mental health.
I have two questions, and these are my own questions, Ridge. One, and I should have asked it a while back, but you were describing kind of the way folks come into Network to Work and that they come in through these community contacts. I assume that's not the only way in. Like that, can they just go to Network to Work's website and plug in that way?
So yes, they can. They can go to intowork.org and browse jobs, and what we call it is self-register. So if they self-register, then Network to Work, our staff, they get sent enrollment instructions automatically once they've done that. And then when they show up to us, we take them from there, we assign a navigator, and we go through the rest of the process. So people can self-register. It's the best of both worlds, I think. Most people, in our experience, need that connector to really grab them by the lapels and say, I think, because if you've been kicked to the curb by the economy and your parents before you and their parents before them, there is a lack of faith in yourself that you can do more than what you're doing. And so what we have found in the job seekers that we've had the honor to serve is that they don't even see potential in themselves. And beyond not being able to see potential in themselves, which is why these community-based connectors are so important, it's just hard to know what's available out there. And if you've had any experience with an online application process, the idea that you're going to fill out something online and magically get a job is just alien to most people. And so we think the lapel grabbing is really important. And so we wanted to maintain that. But for people who are like, I know I need to do something different with my life, they can go on the intowork.org site and browse for jobs and pick one that they think would be a good match for themselves and then get engaged in the process. So best of both worlds.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Rich. My next question, maybe it's a segue into what you were going to go to next, but my question is, do they have to check all these boxes before they move into the help me find a job stage? Does that make sense?
Yes. So, this is a challenge, and I'll address it head on, which is every question we ask somebody, every provider we put on the pathway is a tax that we place on the bandwidth of that person. And our job seekers, the low income neighbors that we have are overtaxed already. There are so many things going on in their lives, and the level of resilience that we see with people and what they can manage is mind-boggling. And so every question I add to the survey, I very consciously think, is there going to be benefit to this job seeker by asking this question? Is there going to be benefit to this job seeker by adding this provider to their pathway? And so we divide providers into essential providers and helpful providers. Essential providers are ones that we know you need to collect. They're the ones along that pathway. If you don't have them, you're not likely to be successful. And we are doing a disservice to our job seekers if we help them get into a job that they literally cannot get to because they don't have a car. And so what we do, the way we break this out is we assign dates to essential providers to say you really need to connect with these providers, and that's what generates the nudging, the notifications, the past due flags. That all happens with essential providers. There are a whole raft of additional providers in our community who would be great for a job seeker to connect with, but they're not essential for getting and keeping a job. Financial coaching is a great example of that. Tax aid assistance through United Way is another example. You should go and get your earned income tax credit because you earned it. But we're not going to say you can't get a job until you've connected with tax aid at the United Way. So that we do include that information on their pathway as a helpful provider. They ought to know about that resource because that resource is incredibly valuable. They ought to know how to apply for SNAP benefits if they don't receive them, but they income qualify. But we're not going to say, if you don't get SNAP benefits, we're not going to serve you. So our platform is divided into essential and helpful providers, and only the ones with assigned dates get flagged. And we only vouch for job seekers at the end of this process if they have no past due flags for essential providers. So we're not going to tell an employer in our community that this person is job ready if they don't have a car that works and they work shift, they're a plumber's assistant, which means get yourself to the job site at 6:30 in the morning. Well, much as I love Kat and Jaunt, getting them to a job site every day at 6:30 in the morning out in Culpeper, they've got to be independently mobile. And until we can make them independently mobile or help them get independently mobile, we are not going to recommend them for that job. And so it's hard because we get a lot of people that say, I want a job right now, but we can't afford to set people up for failure. And one of the things that I'm very conscious about in the work that we do is not to be a hope dangler. Not say, oh, we've got this great job out there. Oh, I'm sorry, you got nobody to watch your children? Sorry. So it's a tension that we address, that we work with every day, but it's real, and we're aware of it. And we get pushback, and again, this is hard, and we're almost done, and then we can open up to everybody, but it is very hard to walk the line as we're trying to walk between job seeker agency. People need to have agency. They have to have control over their own lives, and our knowledge about what it takes to navigate the workforce world. And it's the balance between respecting people's lived experience and our lived experience and our knowledge that if you don't have a car that works, you're not going to last in that plumber's job. And so you may want to go get that job tomorrow, and you may say, that's my desire and goal, but we are not serving you well if we set you up for that and you can't get there. So that's again, you can tell I worked in the United States Senate because I can filibuster with the best of them. So let me move on and make sure I get to the end, just in terms of kind of where we are, and then we can open up for questions. So this is our enrollment since we started in 2014-15, when I was doing this by myself on paper with job seekers, way back at the beginning, before there was a technology platform, before there was network to work staff. I was just doing this by myself. And as you can see, as we built out the job seeker network, we were able to enroll more and more people. And right before the pandemic hit, which is the year 2020, in that fiscal year, we were on track to serve 400 job seekers that year. We served 303, and then in March we closed our doors and stopped serving people. And then we served 170 during the pandemic. So our job seeker network works, and as you can see in the middle there, we are reaching the people who've been left behind in our economy. So 59% of our job seekers are Black neighbors. And so we are grabbing the people who have historically and intentionally, I might add, been kicked to the curb in our economy and not given the chance that others have to succeed. We do not cherry pick our job seekers. If you're after a job that's one of the ones that we have on our curated list of jobs, we're going to enroll you in network to work, no matter how many barriers you may face. So this shows, the percentage that are on public benefits. 41% of our job seekers are criminal justice involved. 77% don't have a high school diploma or just have a high school diploma. 66% of our job seekers are single parents who are often disconnected or distrustful of the very system set up to support them. And so that's our enrollment. And then in terms of what we've been able to do, and this captures everybody using kind of pre-pandemic information. So we've served over 1,000 job seekers. And what we found, kind of looking at the data pre-pandemic, is that 75% of our job seekers, we helped them find jobs, and half of those jobs paid our bare minimum at the time, which was $25,000 or more. Now, this captures the people that I was serving by myself back when I had no idea what I was doing, and hopefully I served them well. But so what we can see at the bottom, on the bottom left, is that for that broader group that we were able to get into employment, their pre-employment wages were around $16,000, so just over minimum wage at the time, which would have paid them $14,400. Most of them were working for a living, but in low-paying jobs. And after they were done with us, they were making a little over $25,000 on average, which was a wage gain of a little over $9,000, which is a 55% increase in their wages, which is phenomenal. But we acknowledge we move people from being extremely low income to just low income, which isn't where we want to be, but making progress. However, if you look over on the right, and this is all data that we got from the Virginia Employment Commission, which is required to collect wage data on everybody in the Commonwealth who earns even a dime. If we were able to get people over that $25,000 threshold. So the way I think about it is, if we were able to get people over and out of the crush of the low wage economy, if we were able to get them over that threshold, they soared. If we got them over the $25,000 threshold, their average earnings were $38,000 a year. Their median wages were $33,000 a year. So as you can see from that, some people did, I mean, they just were off the charts. Once they got out of the crush of that minimum wage job, they like took off like rockets. But even looking at the median wage, we were able to get people close to that $35,000 line, which when added with to the earned income tax credit, can get people to a place where they can afford, to live in Charlottesville without receiving a lot of other benefits. So we're making progress. We've got a long way to go, but we're getting where we need to be. And as a result of this work, we were recently recognized by the Coalition on Adult Basic Education as the State Innovation of the Year, which we're very proud of. And I think we're on the right track, but there's more work to be done. Because of that work that we're doing, we are expanding to sites across the Commonwealth. So we're not just working in the Charlottesville region, but we're also working from Hampton Roads to the Shenandoah Valley, taking this network to work framework and using the information that we've gained here, trying to help families that are struggling across the Commonwealth. And if it works in those pilot sites, our expectation is that we can do this across the Commonwealth.
So Rich, we had a question come in. I should know my Virginia geography better, but it didn't look like that map stretched all the way to Lynchburg. We had a question asking.
It does not. Not yet.
Okay.
So it goes as far south as Nelson and Buckingham in our region, but not yet to Lynchburg. Part of the idea here is, we all know if we live in Charlottesville that we're very special. And so the question is, does something that works really well in Charlottesville, where we're all so special, work in other places, like a really rural place like the Shenandoah Valley, or a balkanized place like Hampton Roads, where there are a lot of localities, a lot of territorialism, et cetera. It's a distributed responsibility model, and does it work, distributing that responsibility across providers in other kinds of places? Our goal in those pilot sites is to reduce poverty by 1/3 by 2030. And that means successfully serving here in the Charlottesville region 500 families a year. And we saw pre-pandemic that we were on the verge of 400 families. And we've added an additional staffer since then to expand our job seeker network. And we think that we can get to 500 families a year. And if we do that for 8 years, we will reduce poverty by 1/3, which we define as getting them over that $35,000 a year threshold. It's a huge reach goal, but we got to be reaching for these kind of goals. And we think that with enough intentional effort, we can do that. So that's it for me. And I'm going to stop my share and open it up to others for questions, comments, suggestions. And I do thank you for your attention.
Wow, this has been so great, Rich. Thank you so much. I have a few questions in the hopper, so to speak. So you mentioned the connectors, the community connectors, back to those folks. How does one find a community connector? I know Harold because of Legal Aid, and I used to work there, but I'm not sure everybody knows Harold, although maybe they do, because he knows a lot of folks.
So I think embedded in that are two different questions, which is, how does a job seeker find a Harold? And our operating theory is that there are heralds in every community, and there are go-to people in every community that people go to. So our challenge at Network to Work is the other part of that question is, how do we find those connectors? How do we identify the people who have enormous social capital in our communities? And the short story is, before I launched Network to Work, I looked into that, and there was actually a professor at the McIntyre School of Commerce that had literally written the book on social network theory, which this is about social networks. And he had a whole method for finding the well-connected people in neighborhoods. It's called the snowball method. I won't go into it. Well, as this actually works, as I was looking at trying to find my first 2 neighborhood-based connectors when I launched Network to Work a long time ago, they appeared to me. They said, I heard what you're trying to do and I want to be a part of it. We now have 300 community-based connectors in our network because people who have this kind of social capital are always looking for ways of enhancing their social capital. They have their ears to the ground. That's what makes them who they are. And so they have found their way to us because they know that we can help their friends and neighbors get quality jobs. And so it has actually happened organically, like that old Suave commercial. You know, we tell somebody and so on and so on and so on. We did hire, and she just started last week, an actual person dedicated to building out that job seeker network and doing more about finding more of those connectors. We are not connecting into the Latino community, for example. We need to do more work there. And so we are going to get our own ears to the ground and find those connectors. But my theory ended up being correct, which is that if we stay focused on serving job seekers well, the people who care about their friends and neighbors find their way to us.
Great. What would be the impact of raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour, on poverty levels?
Huge, huge. I mean, what we're seeing is because of the, UVA recently raised its wage to $15 an hour for entry-level positions, and a lot of other employers in our region followed suit. And it is an automatic boost to get people out of the crush of that low-wage economy. And so now people are starting from a higher floor. And so getting them over that $35,000 a year mark becomes a lot easier. I mean, it is huge. And it is doing by fiat what we've had to do intentionally. We've had to make people worth $15 an hour by providing them training that made them more valuable in the eyes of employers. Well, by executive fiat, we can say that is now what your labor is worth, no matter what job you're in. So it is an enormous, enormous benefit. And it just makes our work of getting people over the line a lot easier.
So another question came in that was, once you get folks in the job, how do you sustain them in the job? Are you providing services and supports then? Yep.
So we are like the mafia. And once you're in, you're in. We never deactivate a job seeker in our system. And so we make it a point to stay in touch with that job seeker and hopefully with their employer for the first 90 days, because that is the time of great risk. Changing a job is one of the 3 most stressful things that happen in people's lives. And so we try to stay in touch with those job seekers for the first 90 days. And then we check in with them after 6 months to talk about career advancement.
Great. So there's another question. How do you help job seekers who lack stable, affordable housing in our area, which has a shortage of such housing?
Oh, it is so hard. It is one of the, we've figured out an answer to the transportation challenge, but the affordable housing challenge is much, much more difficult to navigate. So our effort has been to try to expand the amount of affordable housing in our community. UVA is committed to building between 1,000 and 1,500 new affordable units, but we call every landlord that we know, we call Roxanne Jones from the city of Charlottesville, who's got housing resources. We are co-located with the Thomas Jefferson Area Coalition for the Homeless. So we walk upstairs and ask Anthony we're trying to, with a group of community partners, build a housing hub that would make housing navigation a one-stop shop. But it is a real challenge, and I won't sugarcoat it. When people don't have stable housing, it is a tough row to hoe.
I'm just reading questions from the chat. How has the unemployment environment affected this work? And what's the outlook on competing with unemployment moving forward? So in our experience, and this is borne out by research in other states, the presence or absence of the unemployment benefit didn't seem to have much of a bearing on whether people felt safe going to work. And in our experience, and this is true in states where they cut off the unemployment benefits a while ago, it did not induce more people into the marketplace. So coercing people in the marketplace in the face of a pandemic didn't seem to work very well. You know, people need to feel like they can go to work, that they can get their kids taken care of. And I think until we get more, until we get past the Delta variant and the fear that induces, I think we're going to see a lot of people remaining on the sidelines and trying to figure out how to scrape by. I mean, at some point, you know, people are coerced into the marketplace. So, you know, maybe in 2 months we'll see an upswing of people who are going to work even though they feel unsafe. But we didn't see the unemployment in particular as being having a big bearing on our enrollment. We're rounding on 1 o'clock, but I have one last question that came through the chat, which is the network to work service available to everyone in the community? Yes. Yep. So it's either available to job seekers by just logging into the letter N, the number 2, then the word work, into work.org, and people can browse jobs, and you all can go look on it yourselves and browse jobs and see what we've got out there. But any job seeker can do that. And if there are providers on the line who are not in our provider network who may offer resources that would be typically needed by job seekers along the pathway, they should just write to me. Kate, I hope you have my email address that you can circulate, and we can get people into the provider network. Yeah, I will put that in the chat as soon as I can exit the full screen. Ridge, I just wanted to say thank you. I wanted to say thank you for everything that you're doing for our community. And thank you for this presentation. It's just been really enlightening and just so great. And I can't say thank you enough. And thank everyone for being on the line. I'm gonna type your email into the chat so that folks have it. Yep. And I'll just close by saying, in our experience, and we're not perfect by any stretch, but we always take helpful advice from how we can do our jobs better. But what we have found is that low incomeness does not have to be a constant to be worked around. It can be a variable that can be changed. And if you're working with a low income person, I would suggest that your very first thought should be, do they need to be low income? Because there are jobs out there and employers desperate for them. Right. So thank you. Well, thank you, Ridge, and thank you everyone for being here today. I hope this has been as enlightening to all of you as it has been to me, and appreciate your taking the time. Take care. Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you for what you do. Bye-bye.